Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you guys are new here, my name is Tori and welcome to my channel, the coziest van life corner of the internet. If you guys haven't yet, you should consider subscribing. I put out new videos every Sunday, and this week we are talking all things building your dream tiny home on wheels. I have been living in a van for 2 years now, and this is the second van build that I have been a part of. But my partner Josh is more of the builder mastermind, so I wanted to get him involved in this week's video to give you all of his tips and tricks for building a van. Hello and welcome to my channel. For those of you that may not know this is my partner Josh. He is the builder mastermind behind our beautiful tiny home on wheels. He's made some appearances in some of my vlogs, but I feel like you deserved a proper introduction. Made ourselves some chais. Tink. Tink. That's still hot. So today we were talking about designing your dream tiny home, and I figured there was nobody better to consult for this video than the builder himself. So I thought we could get started by me asking you a couple of questions about the build process, and you can share some of your knowledge with everybody, and then we can go into our tips and tricks for building a van.
Yeah, sure.
Alright, so out of all of the things that you had to learn and kind of tailor to fit a van, what was the hardest part of the entire van build for you?
The hardest part, I would say, would be the plumbing. Instead of using regular pipes, I used a hose, a plastic tube to run from our water tank all the way to our sink. And within the plumbing system, I added a water filter that's built in, so I had to go from plastic tube and convert it to the metal hose for the water filter, and then back into the plastic tube to install into our water pump, and then from the water pump I had to convert it back into a metal hose again.
To attach to the sink.
Yeah, to attach it to the sink. So I probably spent $70 to $100 just buying random things to fit together to make it all work.
We also spent a lot of time in the plumbing aisle at Home Depot staring at things, trying to make things fit that didn't quite fit. I always felt super clueless standing in the plumbing aisle, but...
Yeah, it took about 4 or 5 different days of just trying to figure it out.
There's a lot of ingenuity that goes into kind of fabricating a mobile plumbing system or a mobile anything. There's a lot of things that you have to kind of tailor and work with that are different to standard construction. That can get a little bit tricky, so it does require quite a bit of patience. Before we get into our specific tips, I thought it would be a good idea if maybe you could talk me through kind of the build process start to finish, like how you tackled things like that. So my question to you would be, I bought a van, I want to build it out. Where do I start?
Well, the first step would be taking out everything that doesn't belong in your new build. Extra seats that you're not going to use, or the wall panels.
Subflooring.
Yeah, so just tearing out and demoing everything that doesn't belong.
You want a nice clean slate to build on, so I think this step is super important.
Yeah, get it down to the bare metal. From there you can add all of the insulation that you want. We recommend filling all of the blank spaces in the walls, all the empty spaces, filling that with insulation. We use foam boards to fill in those spaces, and then we use the spray foam gap filler to fill in all the cracks. And
then on top of that, we also did an additional layer of peel and stick duct insulation. I absolutely swear by this stuff. It is super easy to install. It does come at a little bit of a higher price tag, but I definitely think it's completely worth it with the ease of install and the efficiency and the thinness of the product as well. Super great for van builds.
You want to cover all of the metal with some type of insulation. There'll be parts that are really thin that you don't want to lose space in those spots. That's what the peel and stick duct insulation is good for. It's because it's really thin and you can cover those spots where you're not trying to lose space.
That's a great point. Every inch counts in here, and using that super thin, super efficient insulation does help us save those precious inches. And you've heard me swear by this before, but insulating very thoroughly is really important. It makes a difference not only in the winter but in the summer, and it can make living in a van much more comfortable and much more sustainable long term. So we highly recommend that you take your time with this step, be super thorough, and make sure that you have all your bases covered. Alright, so we've got our insulation in. Wiring was next, right?
Yeah, after the insulation, you want to lay down your wires and have everything mapped out for every spot that you want to have electrical hookup or a wall outlet or anywhere you need access to electricity. You want to have that already laid out.
It's super important too that you know exactly where everything is going to go, and this is where having your layout planned before you start your build comes in. You have to account for any and all things that need wired underneath your walls before your walls go up. So if you guys want to hear all my tips and tricks for laying out and designing your van build before you begin building, I actually did make a video on that a couple of weeks ago, and I will link it up on the screen for you guys if you want to give that a watch.
Yeah, and you don't need to already have your solar panels and batteries. You don't have to have that all hooked up immediately during the wiring stage, but just the wiring itself needs to go into the walls and in the ceilings.
That's a good point. And you want to think about too at this stage your placement on your outlets, how high you want them above your countertops, your light switches and things like that. All of that needs to be accounted for in the wiring stage.
That would be a good time to install any wires that go through your roof. So that would be your solar panel wires. We installed a Wii Boost. We installed that after our build, but we would have preferred to install that before our build.
Because now we have a lovely exposed wire that drives me absolutely insane. But if you want to see the 5 things that I regret about our van build, there is also a video for that I will pop up here if you want to head over there and check that out.
So next is framing. You want to put up 1x4s, which will save space as opposed to a 2x4, and you bolt those 1x4s vertically from the ground all the way up to the very top of the ceiling. You want to space those out about a foot apart. That'll give you a lot of stability for everything that you're attaching to the framing. We're also accounting for any vibrations while you're driving your van around. And also, when you're living in this close of quarters, the tendency to like bump into your walls.
It happens all the time, guys.
Yeah, so you want your walls to be very strong and stable with extra framing.
Yeah, the framing is super important. Anything that you build into your van is going to be permanent, and you don't want it sliding around, and you want everything to be built very sturdy and strong. So making sure that you have good framing attached to the metal framing that comes with the van is super important. We were even able to get a little bit of a bend out of our 1x4s because the walls in here aren't 100% square. Because we used a 1x4 instead of a 2x4, the wood is a little bit more malleable, and we were able to get framing that was a little bit more true in shape to the actual van itself.
Yeah, so we bought these giant metal tapping screws to attach those.
Giant.
Yeah, and once you've bolted those on, it'll bend the wood to fit the shape of the wall.
Gotta be gentle with it, you don't want to crack your wood, but
And it's a lot easier to attach things to your framing and use a wood-to-wood screw than it is to use a metal tapping screw for everything.
absolutely. Now that everything is framed out, we started to build in our furniture or our like fixed what is the word that I'm looking for?
Fixtures.
And our fixtures, sure, that can be the word.
Also, during this stage, you would want to install your vent fans. So for that, you'd obviously have to cut out the hole the size of vent fan.
Make sure you check the weather before you cut holes in your roof. Very important.
Yeah. We're mostly trying to get everything ready for the walls to go up.
Yeah.
So anything that needs to go in before the walls has to get done probably after the framing or during the framing.
Yeah. And we highly recommend building in your fixtures or your furniture, whatever you want to call it, ahead of your walls. That way you don't waste money on paneling that isn't really going to be showing. We used a lot of plywood to kind of finish off the walling behind our furniture instead of spending the extra money to have the paneling all the way around.
At this stage, we also built in our pocket door.
Retainer wall, yeah.
So that even though that wall is just plywood and we didn't use our wall panels for that, we still wanted to build that in before doing the walls.
We built a lot off of that as well. We had to have those in before we put our cabinetry in because our cabinetry is attached to those retainer walls.
Yeah.
And we wanted to see exactly how much space we had left once all of the 4 walls were included to get our final dimensions and everything nailed down.
We bought cabinets to put in.
I think I would have preferred to have, done custom cabinetry if we weren't on such a time crunch, but because that was kind of new territory for both of us, we weren't super confident that we'd be able to figure it out that quickly. So this was just kind of a time-saving measure for us, but we did actually lose a little bit of space that we could have salvaged had we built custom cabinetry just because of the curvature of the van.
Once all the fixtures are in, you can put up the wall paneling, flooring. We just got regular...
I think it's vinyl.
We just got regular vinyl floor panels that we put in, and then we put in some trim boards, a piece of quarter round to go around to cover the edge of the flooring.
Yeah. And we wanted to wait until kind of last with our flooring just to avoid them getting scuffed or damaged during construction because there was a lot going on in here and it's a small space. At this stage it was more cosmetic things that we were adding. I was finishing up the couch cushions, sewing those together, putting up the paneling. This is when it really started to come together and we could kind of really start to see the van turn into what was going to be our home. Last but not least, we installed our plumbing. I think we kind of waited on this just because we weren't exactly sure what we were doing quite yet. It was kind of the one thing that both of us were a little hesitant to tackle because we didn't have a super in-depth plumbing system in our first build.
We just used the simple concept of pumping water from a water tank that's attached underneath the vehicle and running it up under our sink, but it turned into a lot more of a complicated task because sinks and water filters weren't designed to attach to just a plain plastic tube.
Yeah, because we didn't go with like traditional piping. But the benefit of going with that tubing is that there's no places underneath our bed anywhere from our water tank until under our sink that we can have a leak. So that kind of saves us from really ever having that kind of damage in the rest of our build. If there were to ever be a leak, it would be isolated underneath the sink and would be fairly easy to find the source.
That was the only way I could see doing it.
A very finagled plumbing system, but it works. And that's all that matters. I linked a lot of the stuff that we used for this build in my van build cost breakdown video if you are curious more about what we did spend on our build and the products that we use. And I'll go ahead and link all of the appliances, things like that that have worked successfully for us that I would recommend to you guys. I will link those down below. So that was kind of a walkthrough of the build process. We finished this van in just about a month. It was an absolutely crazy month. You worked all day, every day. Huge shout out to my grandpa as well. He helped Josh put this van together and put in a lot of hours, and we are so, so grateful that you guys opened your home to us and allowed us to have a space to build our dream home. And I feel like it was really great that Josh had an extra set of hands because mine are just not that useful when it comes to construction. So my last question for you before we get into our tips for anyone building a van is, what tools would you recommend having for a build?
You definitely need to have a jigsaw with a metal cutting blade in order to cut the holes for your vent fans, because I would consider having vent fans non-negotiable.
Oh yeah, absolutely non-negotiable.
With a jigsaw you can cut those holes perfectly, and as long as you seal it up right, you won't ever have a leak. You won't have to worry about cutting it.
I'm gonna put that on silent.
Yeah, a jigsaw is good for cutting odd angles that would be too difficult with a rotary saw.
Well, and there's a lot of those odd cuts that you run into building in a space that isn't necessarily a traditional shape either. So that's a super great tool to help you get some of those curvatures and things to build a little bit more exactly to the shape of the van that you're working with. What other tools would you recommend having, bud?
I would recommend having 2 sets of drills. One for using drill bits to pre-drill your holes, and then the other with
actual screwdriver.
With a screw head so that you can use that one to actually screw in the screws.
That way you don't have to go back and forth between the drill bits.
Yeah, because you have to pre-drill a lot of your holes so that you don't accidentally split the wood. Instead of having to switch your bits out constantly, it really helps to have 2 sets.
That's a good point. I never really thought about that. Good tip there, bud. What other tools did we use pretty frequently?
There's a couple things during the demo process that I used a grinder or a metal saw to cut the metal for a couple pieces that I couldn't get unscrewed.
Yeah, they really put those bolts on there.
Yeah.
Some of that stuff was hard to get out.
Some things you just need to get out in order to fit in, like your flooring, for instance. It won't lay flat if you've got a bolt sticking out of the ground. So
yeah, that's a good point. I don't know how they get those bolts so tight too. Like, cause we tried to just remove them like normally, but man, those suckers were on there. So now we kind of gave you guys an overview of our experience with building our vans and just kind of got to know the builder a little bit. We sat down and came up with a list of tips. I wanted to come up with some things that I hadn't heard other places that would have kind of streamlined our build process or just made things make a little bit more sense to us. So without further ado, tip number 1. This one is super, super important. This was more on my end of our build. I kind of took over the ordering and kind of all of the online planning and like securing the materials. But the one thing that I did notice that I wasn't really expecting when I was ordering all of these things is a lot of things for van builds aren't like readily available. Some of the things that you order have to be custom made or are made as you order them. And a lot of them do take quite a while to come in. So my biggest tip when you start your van build is to figure out all of the materials that you're going to need and when you're going to need them by, and start ordering things early. Even if you don't need it yet, it's never a bad idea to have it on hand. That way when you are ready to go ahead and install those things, you're not waiting on them to arrive. They are already there and ready to go. This was especially true with our water tank. I had a really hard time finding a water tank that would fit with the dimensions of the area that we wanted to put it. And I think if I wouldn't have waited so last minute, we could have probably found a bigger water tank, something that worked a little bit better for us.
Yeah, and what I would add to that is you're going to be taking several dozen trips to the hardware store.
Like 35.
Yeah, so while you're there, you might as well get everything that you possibly could need, and if you get too many things, you can just take them back when you're done. And that'll just save you lots of trips.
Yeah, and it's important to keep track of your receipts and everything if you are buying like this, because we were able to get a good chunk of money back at the end of our build. We were able to return quite a few of the things that we didn't end up using.
The next tip, I would say, you want to have everything planned out before you start building. Have it very detailed down to the inch. You don't have any spare space, so if you've built one thing too big, then there's not enough space for something else.
So this also is super important too when you're ordering things, because when you're picking out your appliance and everything, you need to know exactly how big they're going to be so that you can account for them while you're building, even if you don't have them yet. Also true with wiring. If you don't have this planned out ahead of time, you end up with those annoying exposed cords or having to backtrack and take some of your walling off because you forgot to run a wire. So I think the more detailed you are in your planning, the more smoothly your build will go and save yourself a lot of time and money.
Next tip would be patient. You're building in a space that isn't square, and it's not technically meant for building, like housing construction.
Yeah, it's definitely not by the book construction for sure.
You got to be able to imagine the space that you want it to be and take the necessary steps to get there.
Yeah, and it's not always super easy to find information on this kind of construction online. While there is a lot of great van life content available, sometimes they just don't get quite as specific as you would like, especially when you're running into a very specific sort of problem. Finding the answers can be a little bit tricky. So I definitely recommend maybe stepping back, think outside of the box. It's not an easy undertaking by any means, and it definitely does require a little bit of patience. My next tip is to utilize the resources that are available to you. YouTube was probably our best resource when we were building this van. A lot of the information that I could find on van builds I found on YouTube. There are a lot of great creators who have made van build series, other people out there that you can connect with and who have been through this sort of experience before. I personally learned everything I know about building vans on YouTube, and I cannot recommend that resource to you guys enough. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to reach out to people. I personally sent so many messages to other creators trying to figure out specific issues that we ran into in our build. And from my experience, for the most part, everyone is super, super happy to help. That's what they're there for. That's why they create this content for you guys. That's why I create this content for you guys. So make sure to utilize your social media resources that are available to you. There are tons of van lifers, not only on YouTube, but Instagram. There's van life bloggers as well. There's tons of great information out there, and it makes everything a lot easier.
Next tip, use lots of screws in your construction, because you're going to be going over lots of bumps throughout your travels, and you don't want your cabinets to be falling off the walls or anything of that sort.
Oh,
so
can you even imagine?
So with vibrations, the kind of the tendency of things to come apart, so you want to have extra security, and that kind of goes along with the next tip, which is to use cabinet locks. For when you're driving around, cabinets will swing open if you don't have a very secure way to latch them.
Yeah, I highly recommend super heavy duty cabinet locks. We went on the lighter side for some of our cabinet locks to start out with, and we do have a couple of drawers that still find their way open while we're driving, so I highly recommend using a heavier duty lock. Anything in your van needs to be secured. Things go flying, so it's really important to think about all of that before your maiden voyage as well.
Double the time that you think you'll need for the build, because everything will always take longer, especially if you've never done it before. Even if you have done it before, it probably will take twice as long as you think.
Yeah, it's a learning process. There's a lot of hiccups to run into along the way. Along with this one, I would say you might want to leave a little bit of wiggle room in your budget as well. Just from personal experience, everything does take a little bit longer and costs a little bit more than you originally planned for, so it's always better to have that cushion time and those cushion dollars, just in case if you finish early, great, but if not, you've kind of already allotted yourself those couple of extra weeks.
Next, I would say that you want to invest in quality appliances. We really like our fridge, our new fridge that we bought. We bought a typical mini fridge for when we first moved in here, and it went out within less than a year.
It was also super energy inefficient. We had a lot of issues with it draining our battery bank as well.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, brands like Dometic, they are made specifically for this lifestyle and this kind of travel. They are much more energy efficient, and they are definitely worth the extra pennies.
Mm-hmm. Our last tip is to install switches for anything that you'll be turning on and off frequently.
In a convenient location.
Yeah, so that would also include a switch for your water pump, which is for your sink.
A switch for your inverter. Ours is currently in a bench, and I really wish we would have put a switch on the wall for that.
Yeah.
Running off of a limited power supply, we do switch things off when we're not using them, so having those conveniently located switches just makes all of those things a little bit easier, and it's just one less thing that is a hassle living in a van. Alrighty, I think that is all that we have for you guys this week. Thank you so much for being part of this video and sharing all of your wisdom with us. I thought it would be super important to have him be involved in this video because he did more of the building, and I just felt like it needed to be covered by an expert. Thank you, dear. That is all from us this week. If you guys have any more questions about van builds or anything like that, leave me a comment down below and I would happily get back to you. If you guys liked this video, please go ahead and smash that thumbs up button for me. Josh would really appreciate it. And I'll see you guys next Sunday. Do you have something you wanted to contribute? He has made some you kind of like were able to like